Hey everybody, welcome back to Class 4 of mdo204. In the next three classes, we're going to take a look at dynamic shards and how we can use the shatter command and shatter an object and use Modo's dynamic solver to create some really interesting effects. So let's get right to it. So here we can see that we have a plane broken up into tons of little pieces, and it's basically exploding outwards. This is a really cool effect, and it's actually pretty simple to set up. So let's start from the very beginning. I have a new scene here, and I'm just going to bring in a large and fairly flat piece of geometry inside of our mesh here. And I'm going to just center this. So from here, I'm going to switch over to polygons, and I'm going to hit Shift D, and this is going to help us subdivide our polygons. I don't want to just hit D because that's going to actually subdivide in a very different way. So what we want to do is hit Shift D, and we're going to do this faceted, and I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit Shift D again and hit OK. And that'll basically just put some more geometry into this shape here. Now this is really simple once we have our shape to shatter it. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we're working in the right size, because when working with dynamics, it basically is calculated off of real world physics and dimensions. So if we make it too small or too big, it might not move the way we want it to move, whereas if we work on scaling in the real world, then we can know how to add weight and things properly to it. So here we can see 24 inches for each square, and one of the things that we could do is come to View and our ruler tool, and our ruler tool is going to allow us to make measurements between two things. And what I could do is hit X, which is going to turn on snapping, and that'll allow us to snap to the sides of things. And we can see that this is 52 feet and 5 inches across now. This is going to work out just fine. We could have dialed these numbers in here when we first made our geometry, but it's always good to be able to measure. So we can simply just turn off our ruler tool again and come back to when we need it. And one of the things that I can do is either double click to make sure I have all of my polygons selected, or if nothing is selected, everything is going to be affected. And I'm going to come over to Geometry, come down to Mesh Shatter. We have a few different ways that we can shatter this, so I'm just going to stick with Uniform and fire this off. It'll ask me how many pieces I want, and I'm going to leave this at 30 for now. And then cutting material is going to be basically the inside of these areas where the shatter happens. So think of it this way: if it was split down the middle here, it would be the two inward faces that face each other from the crack. This will make sense here in a second. So I'm just going to hit OK. And we have our shattered item. So if we come over to shading, we can see shading interior. And basically this material is red. And you can see bits and remnants of it showing up here. And that's just the inside areas of this mesh. So we have a material set up for the inside pieces. We could easily just select all of our pieces here and hit M for material and call this glass. And now this material is going to overwrite this set of polygons, which are all of the pieces on the inside. So I want to show you basically what we can do with this. So we have a mesh item here, which is our original mesh item that is turned off. We have our mesh shards, and if we open this up, we can see all of the different mesh items here. And if I double click the folder, it selects everything, and then I can Control click to unselect the folder, and I'm just going to move these to the outside. I'm going to delete our original mesh item just so we can keep this clean. And I'm going to delete the mesh shards folder. I'm going to select all of these mesh items here, come back to geometry and come back to mesh shatter and go back to uniform. And I'm just going to set this to 6 and hit OK. So now what it's going to do is it's going to take each one of these different pieces and cut them into 6 different pieces. So now we can see we have quite a few more pieces here, and it put all of these into folders. So to keep this all organized, I'm going to put this in a folder, Control G to group that. So if I double click on any of these folders, you'll see it'll select all of the pieces within that folder. So once again, I'm going to select all of these folders and Control G to group everything. So if I double click this, everything is selected. I'm going to come over to the Setup tab now. And we can see by double clicking this folder, it's going to select every single piece that we have in here. I'm going to come over to Dynamics tab on this side here, and I'm going to select Active Rigid Body and just click that. And you can see there's a Dynamics tab now over in this group locator that will allow us to dial in some settings here. So if I deselect this and then just select this item, you'll see that this also has a Dynamics tab now. So each one of these pieces has a Dynamics applied to it. And this is the solver that it brought into our tree over here. And with my mouse over here, I'm just going to hit 0 to make this full screen. And I'm going to hit this button here, which is going to play the simulation. And you can see that everything's just going to fall down. But we know that this is good because these pieces are being affected by gravity now. We could easily just select the solver up here and see that gravity is set to 981, which is accurate. If I turn this to 0 and rerun the sim, nothing falls anywhere. Although there's no gravity in space, I'm going to keep this at 981 meters a second for right now. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to shift click and bring in the sphere. Scale this up a bit. And I'm going to move this down right there. And with the sphere selected, I'm going to come over and click Static Rigid Body. Now if I run the sim again, you can see that all of these pieces are going to fall down, hit this static rigid body, and burst apart. And I could easily adjust the shape of this globe down here. And we can see we're not exactly getting the effect that we thought we would get. It's kind of bursting from a weird angle here. And I think that's because what we want to do is come over to the Dynamics tab on this sphere and come to Collision Type and come to Mesh. So if we try that again, alright, that's much better. So we're now basing the collision shape off the mesh instead of a box or sphere item. With our sphere selected, I'm going to come and change this to Active Rigid Body just by clicking on that, and they should both fall now. But what we can do is come over to Impulse and Impulse on Wake, which means as soon as the simulation is started, we can come down to Impulse and add some impulse on the y-axis in the positive. So if we play this, we're going to need a lot more than that. I'm going to pull this up to maybe 6.74 newtons a second. Play this. Alright, now we see it moving upwards, and the more I add impulse, the faster it's going to go. And that actually is a little bit too strong, so I'm going to pull this back down. Alright, I think that'll work. So one of the things that we could do is come back, select any of these pieces or parts or individual chunks, and come over to geometry and shatter it even further if we wanted. If we look from our top view, come over to items, we could lasso select some items and just apply some shatter to this. I'm going to leave this how it is for now, just for playback speed. You'll notice that when you're working with really heavy simulations, it'll bog down your machine a little bit. So I'm going to come back here, and what I'm going to want to do is switch to our camera view so we can start setting up the shot a little bit. Now remember, the shards are going to be out of a camera view for the time being, and I'm going to come over and set this up since this is a new scene, and just see what our framing looks like on that. That's actually pretty good, and I'm actually going to come back to our solver and just put that down to 0 and see how that looks without any gravity. It's actually kind of cool. So we're going to want to make sure that our sphere is actually not visible. If you'll notice, if you hit play, nothing will happen because you're not actually simming the dynamics that are in this scene. You're going to want to hit this green solid button over here, which is going to run the simulation from the beginning. You'll also notice that if you hit the play button here, even though we're on frame 52, it'll jump back. And that's because we need to cache this. So if we click this green arrow pointing towards the box, we can compute the simulation here and click OK. And it'll run that sim and cache everything for us. So now it doesn't matter what frame we go to, we can see it all happening. And we can also turn off the sphere, which will allow us to have everything in our shot except the sphere, which is perfect. Now if we didn't cache it, it would still need that sphere turned on to calculate the geometry. So if we come over to render, we can see what's happening. And actually what I want to do, this is the shatter interior that I was talking about, how it's red. You'll notice if we change this material, we could make the interior pieces of the shards anything we wanted. And I see a little bit of clipping going on right here. So I'm going to come back to my setup tab. I'm going to come back to perspective and select all of these pieces and change this to mesh. Mesh is going to be a little bit more processor intensive. You might notice when I'm going to turn this back on and re-sim this, recompute the simulation. You can see it takes a little bit longer. Now if we turn the sphere off, We'll frame this up a little bit better. So actually what's happening now is it's basing this off of the mesh, and since these meshes are in a sense touching, it's exploding outwards. So one of the things I'm going to do is turn my sphere back on, select all my stuff. I can simply control click to deselect this guy, come over to my dynamics tab, and I can come down to the glue tab here, and I can add glue to this sim. And what that'll do is any touching piece, it'll keep it glued together. Right now without glue, everything just explodes. But since these pieces are touching and we don't want them to explode out right away, I'm going to just add a little bit of glue. And what should happen now is you'll see that these pieces stay together until it's hit. That's still not giving us the effect that I want, actually, although it should prevent self-collision. Oh, by the way, you can totally scroll around this in real time. So I'm going to just cache this. That way I can come to a frame, turn off the sphere, and start to frame this up a little bit nicer. And I think this is looking better. So if I come back to render, I can now come, and I'm actually going to I'm just going to delete. Well, no, I'm not going to delete it. That's bad form. I'm going to just turn it off and drag this material above. Set this to a darker blue, just as a working material for now. And it looks like I missed grabbing the inside of these, so I'm going to just come back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to a frame like this, select everything, make sure I'm in polygon mode by hitting 3, select everything, and what I want to do, I just realized I want to, you can middle mouse click to select through everything. That way you'll get all of your material, and if I hit M, I'll hit update that for glass, and if I look now, all of the inside pieces are rendering to that material. So what you want to do, instead of right clicking and selecting, you want to middle mouse and select, and that'll actually select through. So let's say these two polygons, some in front, some in back. Let's try get that a little bit closer. So if I right click and select, it's only selecting what it can see. So we're not getting any of the edges or the backside there. But if I middle mouse and select, it'll grab everything that it can't see. It basically is just selecting everything within that area. So anyway, come back to render. And we can see we have our shards exploding upwards now. And the great thing about this is I can always come back and adjust all of my different settings. I can select my solver. Maybe I'd want a little bit of gravity in there, just so it gives it a little bit of a feel or look to it. I can add all of my different forces and fall-offs, so turbulence, radial, linear, wind. Although I don't need any of these for space, they are there if you want to play around with them. So I think we'll leave it here for this right now. Just see if you guys can get some working dynamics happening. Play around with the different shatter types as well, because that'll give you different look and feel to your shatters. So before I wrap up the class, I want to touch a little bit about the schematic view. So if I hit 0 to pull this window back down to normal, what I can do is I can drag in this solver right here, and you can see that this little diamond here is yellow. So if I double click that, that'll expand to show you, zoom out, we can see every single piece of this mesh is being pulled in and driven by our dynamic solver here. So this is a really powerful way to set up dynamics as well. If we pull in our sphere, we can see our sphere at the top here is also being pulled into this solver here. Pull this down. So that's getting piped into the solver as well. So we'll cover more of this. I just wanted to show you that all of the dynamics can also be set up through your nodes. So all of you that are coming from Nuke or other node-based applications, this is really exciting because there's a lot of power that we can do within here. So I'm just going to leave that there as is. Save this out. And I really want to quickly touch on another cheap but quick way to kind of achieve the same effect here. So I'm going to turn those off for the time being. And I'm going to just make another mesh item by hitting N, which is going to create a new mesh item. And I'm going to create a shape like this. Grab these and just kind of pull it back. And we can make this a little bit imperfect. Pull that back too. So here we have like a little shard. I'm actually going to select it and select this, shrink it down a bit. Alright. So another thing I want to do with this shard is I'm just going to shift click on a globe and scale the globe up. So I'm going to rename this globe really quick to emitter item. And I'm going to name this mesh here to shard. And I'm going to turn off the emitter item for right now. So I'm going to come to add item, come down to particles and replicator. So what I'm going to do is the prototype is going to be shard. So let's frame this up so we can see. And I'm going to set my point source to emitter item. And we can see what happens is all of a sudden a bunch of replicators are showing up on our emitter item. And right now they're just showing up as instances, but I can hit O. So under drawing and control, I can come to replicators and select all. And that'll basically allow me to see all of my replicator items now. So from here, under replicator, we can align to polygons, align to surface, or the point data, which is going to be vertices. What I think looks best for this is going to be surface. And I'm going to hit O in this window just to expand it. And you'll notice that we have things down here: random scale, random twist, random offset. So I'm going to start giving some of these some random twist, and this is going to be rotating them from their center point on the areas that they're being replicated. And then I could give it some random scale as well. And actually what I'm going to do is gang these values and pull that somewhere like that. So now we can see that we have replicators in our scene, And if we set up our camera, we could easily move our camera to the center of this. And the cool thing is this is all animatable. Same with our sphere. So if we come back to our emitter sphere and animate the rotation of this, we can see that we could easily get these shards moving around us. So one of the things that we could do, if I come over to animate, go to the first frame, these two buttons here will give you some more information. So we click this one, we'll get our item tree that we want. Come back to camera, and on frame 1 we'll set a keyframe. We'll come to frame 120, pull this around. So now we have these items moving. So for a second layer of animation, instead of doing this on our transform, let's just collapse that. What we want to do it on is variations. So I'm going to set keyframes here, come to the last frame, and drag these values around. So now we have two layers. So we're spinning our emitter item, and now we're spinning the variation of these. So as these move, we can see they're actually twirling as well. So one of the things I want to do before I close out this class is come to our emitter item, and in our transform rotation here, I'm going to actually select this so we get to see our points. I'm going to select these, and I'm going to simply click this guy right here, which is going to flatten these out. And then same thing with our replicator. Select these points and flatten them out so they're not eased in or eased out, so everything's moving at a constant speed. So if we look at this render, we can see that these things are now floating in space and spinning. So this is another approach you could take to certain shots. And one of the ways that we could play around with this is we could attach this replicator to any emitter item we wanted. So we could attach it to a cube, a triangle, anything really. And the other thing that we can do, so with this selected, I'm going to come to perspective and just zoom out so we can see all the shards on the surface here. I could simply select this and hit Shift D, and that's just going to give us more shards because now we have more geometry that it's going to be replicating on. And if we're aligning to surface, it's just going to continue to put these across the surface of this model. You can see if we use polygons, it's basically the same thing. If we continue to subdivide this model, it's just going to continue to add more geometry. That's a bit excessive, so I'm going to just put that back. Line to surface, turn it off. So now you can see that we have a lot more in this scene, and it's all happening and being updated with the animations that we have downstream. So now we just have more pieces moving and spinning. So it's a really cool way and fast way to work. So I think I'm going to leave it here for you guys. Feel free to experiment with both the replicators and the dynamic shards. Post your work in the forums. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. You should know a little bit about the shader tree by now to be able to apply some sort of material to this. So yeah, with all of this stuff, there's a lot of powerful and cool things that you can do. I hope you guys have fun, and I will see you in the next class when we take it even further. Alright guys, take care.